In the opening scene, Andre, a young person of color, walks alone through a well-groomed suburban street at night. A small sports car begins to follow him slowly. Startled, Andre decides to take a different route and hastily heads back the way he came. As he checks to see what the car did, he notices it's parked where it was, but the door is open. Suddenly, a man wearing a middle-aged head protector attacks Andre, rendering him unconscious, and then drags his body into the car. Rose arrives at Chris's apartment with coffee and pastries, ready for their weekend trip to visit her family. Chris worries about her family's reaction to him being a person of color, but Rose reassures him, mentioning her father's support for Obama. Chris asks if he's the first person of color she's dated, and Rose confirms. She assures him her parents will be accepting. As Chris goes for a cigarette, Rose throws it out, knowing her parents dislike smoking. Chris contacts his friend Rod, a TSA agent, reminding him to take care of his dog and avoid feeding him human food. Rod, disapproving of Chris dating a white woman, warns him against visiting white people and teases him about his jealousy. While driving, a deer suddenly dashes in front of their car, resulting in an accident. They inspect the situation and call the police, claiming they're visiting Rose's nearby family. When asked for Chris's ID, Rose intervenes, stating there's no need since he wasn't driving. The police let them go, and Chris appreciates Rose standing up for him against the biased officer. Chris and Rose arrive at her parents' house, where her father, Dean Armitage, a jovial neurosurgeon, expresses his admiration for Obama, stating he would have voted for him a third time if possible. Rose's mother, Missy, is a strangely calm hypnotist who offers to help Chris quit smoking through hypnosis. But he's uncomfortable with the idea of someone messing with his mind. The Armitages also employ 2 black staff members, Walter the groundskeeper and Georgina the maid. Dean acknowledges the optics of having black employees as wealthy white people but feels attached to them as they've been with the family for a long time. However, something seems off about both Walter and Georgina. They exhibit a distinctly robotic and artificial demeanor, speaking in outdated language. Dean gives Chris a tour of the house, sharing old family photos along the way. He proudly mentions that his father was a track athlete who narrowly missed competing in the 1936 Olympics due to Jesse Owens' victory, which debunked Hitler's Aryan ideals. While it was disappointing for his father, it served as a triumph against Hitler's beliefs. Additionally, there are pictures of Rose's brother, who will join them later. He followed in his father's footsteps as a doctor but faced significant challenges along the way. During the family tea time, Missy stirs her tea and lightly taps her spoon against the cup, a gesture that will hold significance later on. Missy then inquires about Chris's family, prompting him to share that his father left when he was young, and his mother passed away when he was 11 after being hit by a car. Georgina has a momentary glitch while pouring tea, and Missy instructs her to go rest and recuperate. The Armitages inform Rose about their upcoming large gathering the next day, which surprises her as she wasn't aware it was an annual event. Rose's brother Jeremy arrives, displaying his spoiled and aggressive demeanor. Over dinner and drinks, Jeremy engages Chris in conversation about MMA fighting, suggesting that Chris would excel due to his lineage, but Chris politely declines, stating his reservations about engaging in playful combat with someone under the influence. Dean and Missy advise Jeremy that perhaps it's the ideal opportunity for him to hit the hay. Chris and Rose retire to their room where she is sorry for her family, and they nod off around midnight. Chris gets up and chooses to escape for a cigarette. While outside, he sees something charging at him. It's Walter. He goes directly toward Chris but makes a sharp turn without a second to spare and runs off toward another path. Inside the house, Georgina is gazing through a window. It turns out she's seeing her own reflection, not Chris. She changes her hair, and Chris decides to head back inside. Before Chris can successfully return to his room, Missy frightens him by turning on a light. She says smoking is a vice and offers again to assist him with quitting. He sits but derides the thought of hypnosis, unaware that she is gradually mesmerizing him, involving her teaspoon as a center item. She returns him to the night his mother passed on when he was 11, and he tells her that his mom didn't get back home from work. He was too terrified to do anything, so he just sat staring at the TV, anxiously digging his nails into his bedposts. Present-day Chris is doing likewise, digging his nails into the arms of the seat. She taps her teacup with her spoon multiple times and advises him to sink. 11-year-old Chris sinks into his bed, while present-day Chris sinks into obscurity, seeing himself and Missy far above. His consciousness has left his body, which is deadened in the seat. He wakes in the first part of the day and actually looks at his telephone. Bar has sent Chris an image of him professing to give his canine brew. His battery is low, so he connects it. Chris tells Rose that he thinks her mother spellbound him the previous evening. He has obscure memories of the night. The Armitage's affluent companions show up for the huge party, generally older white individuals. They direct numerous inappropriate sentiments toward Chris. Chris sneaks off and finds a visually impaired man named Jim Hudson. He says that everyone at the party is oblivious. He's an artwork seller, and Chris is very much aware of who he is. Jim says that he likes Chris' work. He perceives the irony of a visually impaired artwork seller but lets him know that he has a great associate who is perfect at depicting pieces. He envies Chris. Jim says that he tried photography but was never excellent in it. When Chris returns to blending with the visitors, he finds another person of color. He's about Chris' age, and Chris attempts to bond with him, yet he also is firm and unnatural like Walter and Georgina. However, something about him appears to be familiar to Chris. Note the sharp eye will see that this is Andre from the initial scene. Chris decides to check in with Rod once more, and he finds his telephone turned off once more. He connects it, calls Rod, and lets him know all that has been going on. Paul cautions him that white individuals love to have intercourse slaves, and he wants to leave. Rose finds Chris, and he tells her how strange everything is and that his telephone was turned off once more. She lets him know he's simply being paranoid because he's in an awkward circumstance. He agrees, and she leaves. Rod advises Chris to snap a photo of the person of color, and he will check whether he remembers him. As Chris is going to leave, he's impeded by Georgina, who apologizes for turning off his phone. She lifted it up while tidying the end table, and when it came turned off, she would have rather not meddled with it further. He says that it's fine and that he didn't intend to rat her out. She doesn't have any idea, so he explains that he didn't intend to cause her problems. She gets very strange and lets out a solitary tear while letting him know that the Armitages deal with her like family. Chris returns outside and attempts to watchfully take the comfortable person of color's image with his cell, but has neglected to switch off the blaze. When his telephone flashes, the man changes. He goes from excessively tedious to raving. His nose starts bleeding, and he jumps at Chris, telling him to get the F out while he still can. Rose has gone ballistic now as well. She asks her father what occurred, and he explains that the flash just caused the person to have a seizure. The man emerges and apologizes for disturbing everybody and says he should get back. Chris and Rose take a walk, and Chris tells her that he's certain he recognized the fellow, and that something weird is most certainly going on. She agrees by saying that it didn't appear to be a seizure by any stretch of the imagination. Chris says that he'd truly prefer to return home at this point. Rose hesitantly agrees. She says she will make up something to tell her folks. Back at the house, Dean is holding a quiet sale with his visitors who hold up bingo cards to offer. Close to him is an image of Chris. Jim Hudson wins the sale. Different visitors generally return home. Chris goes to pack his possessions and gets a call from Rod, who lets him know that the person in the image is a person they knew named Dre, who used to work at a cinema yet disappeared a little while back. The telephone battery dies. Chris sees that the storage room entryway is open. He glimpses inside and finds a case loaded up with photographs of Rose posed sincerely with numerous other people of color. There are additionally photographs of her with both Walter and Georgina, who don't in the slightest look like the automated versions Chris has met. Clearly, Chris isn't the only person of color Rose has been with, all things considered. Rose returns, and Chris says that he wants the keys to place their packs in the vehicle. She searches for them in her satchel as they advance out of the house. Abruptly, Jeremy shows up, hindering the front entryway. Dean and Missy are there as well. Jeremy is prepared to assault, yet Missy and Dean advise him to calm down. Chris continues to advise Rose to get the keys. Missy and Dean let Chris know that they don't believe he should leave. Chris requests the keys once more, and Rose says calmly, "You realize I can't give you the keys." Chris at long last understands that Rose also is in on anything. This is when Jeremy attacks Chris. Dean shouts, and Missy clinks the teaspoon on her glass, making Chris sink once again into the dark void. Meanwhile, Rod continues to attempt to call Chris, but it keeps going directly to voicemail. He looks into the image of the person in the photograph and sees that he disappeared some time back, so he goes to the police. He tells a female officer that this kid was abducted by white people to be a sex slave, just like the missing person in the image. She brings in 2 more officers to listen to Rod's story, but when he finishes, they burst out laughing. No one will take him seriously. Chris awakens to find himself lashed to a chair before a mounted deer head and an old TV set. He watches a video made by Dean's father that talks about eternity, and so on. Chris sees that his fingernails have torn through the leather arm of the chair and exposed the padding. The teacup and spoon appear on the screen again, chiming, and he's out. Rod tries Chris' phone once more, and Rose answers. She lies by saying that Chris left 2 days prior, and she's worried about his whereabouts too. She claims that he left in a taxi or maybe an Uber. Bart tells her that he went to the police, and she seems concerned. He starts to realize that something is wrong, so he tries to record the call. But when he starts talking to her again, she tells him she knows he really wants her. He tells her she's crazy and hangs up. Chris awakens, and Jim Hudson is on the screen. He tells Chris that they will exchange brains. The others at the party were all about being black, but Jim couldn't care less about that. What he really wants is to see the world through Chris' eyes. Dean has perfected the neurosurgery to make this all possible. Furthermore, Missy entrances the body givers to prepare them for the procedure. He will keep existing in the dark void but will be able to move forward as kind of a passenger. The flashing is a sad side effect, as they saw before at the party, chime ting of the teaspoon, and Chris is out again. Dean and Jeremy prep Jim Hudson for a brain transplant. Dean instructs Jeremy to go get Chris. Jeremy goes a few doors down. We see now they were in the cellar of the house, and finds Chris unconscious. He removes his restraints and gets in 4 ready. Chris wasn't unconscious after all. He'd stuffed padding from the chair in his ears to block the teaspoon. He takes out Jeremy. Dean calls for Jeremy and leaves the lab area to search for him. Chris rushes him and skewers him with the deer tusks from the other room. He knocks over a candle that ignites the drapery covering Jim Hudson as well. Rose has tiny headphones in and doesn't know any of this is going on while she listens to music. She is finding out about pictures of attractive-looking people of color with great bodies. Chris goes higher up and finds Missy. She goes for the teacup and spoon, but Chris beats her to them and smashes the cup instead. She goes after him with a knife, but he turns it on her and cuts her to death. Chris goes for the front door again, but Jeremy has returned and puts him in a chokehold. 2 times Chris fights to pull open the front door, but Jeremy kicks it shut on the 3rd attempt. As Jeremy kicks the door, Chris wounds him in the leg and breaks his skull with severe head steps. He runs outside and gets into Jeremy's vehicle. On the front seat is the archaic protective cap from prior. He starts down the driveway but hits Georgina. He can't just leave her lying there as he did his mother, so he puts her in the car and drives down the driveway. She wakes up and reaches for him. In the process, her hairpiece falls off, revealing a scar across her head from a brain transplant as well. They crash into a tree and she dies. Rose hears this through her headphones. Suddenly, the rearview mirror is blown away. Rose is coming after Chris with a rifle. He begs her to stop, but she sees Georgina and refers to her as Grandma. Rose shoots again, missing Chris. Suddenly, Walter runs past Rose in search of Chris, and Rose says, "Get him, Grandpa," as he tackles Chris. They wrestle on the ground, and Chris snaps his photo. Walter turns and asks Rose for her rifle. She gives it to him, and he shoots her in the stomach before aiming the rifle back at himself. Rose is on the ground, bleeding out. She tries to reach for the rifle, but Chris bats it away. As he kneels beside her, Rose puts a hand on his cheek and tells Chris that she loves him. Chris starts to choke Rose but stops. He can't go through with it. A police car pulls up. Rose calls pitifully for help, knowing the local police will throw Chris behind bars. But it's Rod getting out of the squad car. Chris gets into the vehicle. Rod looks at the chaos and says, "Man, I told you not to go in that house." When Chris asks Rod how he found him, Rod reveals that he works for the TSA and assures Chris that everything will be okay. Rose smiles with her final breath as Rod and Chris drive away into the night. The film ends with Rod pushing Chris away from the scene as Rose lies dead in the street. If you make it to the end, thank you so much for watching, and feel free to leave feedback about this video. See you guys in the next one.